Eleanor Carter never thought her life would come down to this moment. She sat across from Richard at the dining table, the same place where they had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and countless family meals. But tonight, the air between them was different, cold, distant, final. Richard exhaled, setting down his wine glass. Eleanor, I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. She stared at him, searching for some kind of hesitation, some sign that this was a mistake, but there was nothing. Just calm indifference, as if you were discussing a business deal rather than the end of 30 years together. You want a divorce? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, adjusting his cufflinks like it was just another Tuesday. It's time. We both know we've been growing apart. And, honestly, I've met someone. The room tilted. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table, her fingers pressing against the wood as she forced herself to stay upright. Someone? Richard sighed, as if he was the one burdened in all of this. Her name is Amanda. She's young, smart, she makes me feel alive again. Alive, as if Eleanor had been nothing more than a weight holding him back all these years. As if the decades she had spent supporting him, raising their children, building his life with him had been nothing more than a chapter he was eager to close. She swallowed the lump in her throat. How long? Richard hesitated. A fraction too long. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He exhaled. A year. 12 months of lies, secrecy, deception, while she had gone about her days, unaware that the man she had built her life around had already moved on. Her stomach twisted. She had given him everything. She had put her dreams on hold so he could chase his. She had taken care of their children while he worked late nights. She had stood by his side through failures, successes, heartbreaks, and triumphs. And now he wanted a fresh start. With someone younger, someone who hadn't spent 3 decades sacrificing for him. Richard cleared his throat. I want to keep things amicable. Eleanor, we can divide things fairly. The house, the accounts. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of, like a charity case, like she hadn't spent 30 years building this life with him. Eleanor stared at the man she had once loved, once trusted, and realized something chilling. She had spent so much of her life making sure Richard had everything he needed. But now, it was time to take care of herself. And Richard Carter had no idea what was coming. Eleanor sat in the lawyer's office. The divorce papers spread out in front of her like a battlefield map. Richard had made his move, now it was her turn. He had been so confident, so sure that he would walk away with everything neatly wrapped up in his favor. She had seen it in his eyes when he handed her the paperwork. His voice sickeningly smooth as he said, "This is the best option for both of us. Eleanor, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for who? He had already moved on. Already built a new life with someone younger. Someone who hadn't spent 3 decades standing in his shadow, making sacrifices so he could shine. And now, he expected her to just accept this one-sided deal, pack her things, and disappear quietly. The settlement was insulting. Richard had conveniently structured their finances over the years so that everything major was in his name. The company they built together? Legally, it belonged to him. The investments they had made? His name was the only one on the accounts. Even their home, the one Eleanor had decorated, maintained, and poured her soul into, was listed as an asset under his ownership. In short, he had planned for this. For a long time. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Naomi, slid the papers back toward her. "He's expecting you to sign this without a fight," she said, voice cool and steady. "He thinks you'll accept whatever scraps he throws your way because he assumes you don't know your own worth." Eleanor let out a slow breath. The Eleanor from a month ago might have signed. She might have believed Richard when he said he was being fair. That this was what's best for everyone. But not this Eleanor. Not the woman who had spent sleepless nights reliving every sacrifice, every moment she had given to him, only to be discarded like an afterthought. She tapped her fingers against the table, her mind sharpening. How much can we take from him? Naomi smiled for the first time that morning. More than he ever thought possible. And just like that, the game had changed. Richard thought he was about to walk away with everything, but he was about to learn a painful lesson. Eleanor Carter wasn't just his ex-wife. She was about to become his worst nightmare. Richard Carter walked into the courtroom with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. He wore the same smug expression he had the day he handed Eleanor the divorce papers. Certain that she would accept whatever crumbs he offered and walk away quietly. But Eleanor wasn't the same woman he had tried to cast aside. She sat across from him. Poised, collected, her eyes sharp and unreadable. Gone was the hesitation, the heartbreak, the years of playing the dutiful wife who put his needs first. Today, she wasn't his wife. She was his opponent. Richard's lawyer stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, my client has made every effort to ensure a fair and equitable division of assets. Eleanor's attorney, Naomi, barely held back a smirk as she slid a thick stack of documents across the table. Your Honor, we'd like to present new evidence. Richard's eyes narrowed as he watched the judge flip through the papers. He didn't like surprises, and this was about to be the biggest one of his life. Naomi leaned forward. Over the past 30 years, Mrs. Carter not only contributed to her husband's business ventures but was also instrumental in their growth. She advised on key decisions, helped establish partnerships, and, most importantly, kept their home and personal life running while Mr. Carter focused on his career. This is not just a marriage dissolution. Your Honor, this is about recognizing that without Mrs. Carter, there would be no Carter Enterprises. Richard's smug expression faltered. The judge glanced at him over the rim of his glasses. Mr. Carter, is it true that your wife assisted in the development of your company? Richard straightened in his seat. Well, she was supportive, but Naomi didn't let him finish. Your Honor, we have emails, financial records, and signed agreements proving Mrs. Carter's involvement. Her contributions weren't just emotional, they were tangible, financial, and strategic. We are requesting that she receive her rightful share of the company's valuation. Richard visibly tensed. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She wasn't supposed to fight back. Eleanor sat calmly as Naomi continued. Additionally, given the length of their marriage and Mrs. Carter's age, we request that she retain ownership of the primary residence and receive a substantial alimony settlement. Richard's lawyer fumbled for words. Your Honor, these claims are... The judge raised a hand. I've heard enough. We'll review the evidence and reconvene. As court adjourned for the day, Richard turned to Eleanor, his voice low and filled with frustration. What the hell do you think you're doing? Eleanor met his gaze without blinking. Taking what's mine. Richard, for the first time in their 30 years together, he realized he had underestimated her. And now, it was his turn to lose. Richard Carter had always been a man who got what he wanted. For years, he had been the one calling the shots, controlling every aspect of his life, including his marriage. He truly believed that when he walked away, he would take everything with him. But now, he was watching his empire slip through his fingers. The court ruling was brutal, at least for him. The judge sided with Eleanor on nearly every major point. She was granted half of Carter Enterprises' assets, recognizing her undeniable contributions to the company's success. The millions Richard had stashed away, thinking they were protected under his name alone, were now subject to equal division. The house he wanted to keep, given to Eleanor, along with a significant alimony settlement. And the final blow? The young mistress, Amanda, the woman he had risked everything for, was suddenly not so interested in him anymore. Richard had imagined a fresh start, a new life with Amanda in his mansion, living off his wealth, free from the responsibilities of his past. But now that he was losing everything, Amanda wasn't quite as devoted. One evening, after yet another disastrous day in court, Richard arrived at the luxury penthouse he had rented while waiting for the divorce to finalize. Amanda was already there, packing her bags. Amanda, what's going on? He asked, a sinking feeling in his stomach. She sighed, barely looking at him. Richard, I didn't sign up for this. I thought you were a man who had control over his life. She gestured around the apartment. Now, you're just another guy with a messy divorce and a shrinking bank account. Richard felt his blood run cold. Are you serious? Amanda slung her purse over her shoulder and kissed him lightly on the cheek, a kiss of goodbye. not affection. Good luck, Richard, she said smoothly, before walking out the door without a second glance. And just like that, he lost everything. He had thrown away 30 years of marriage for a fantasy. And now that the fantasy had crumbled, he was left with nothing. Meanwhile, Eleanor? She wasn't just moving on. She was thriving. Eleanor Carter stood in front of the grand oak doors of the house she had once thought she would have to leave behind. But now, after months of legal battles and emotional reckoning, she was standing here not as Richard's wife, not as his afterthought, but as the rightful owner. She ran her fingers along the polished wood of the banister as she stepped inside. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet everything felt completely different. This house had once been a symbol of her sacrifices. Of all the years she had put her own dreams aside to support Richard's ambitions. But now it was a symbol of her victory. Richard had fought hard to keep the house, to strip her of everything and walk away the winner. But in the end, he had walked away with nothing. The court had awarded Eleanor half of the company's assets, a generous alimony settlement, and full ownership of the home he had tried to take from her. And Richard? He had lost his money, his business, and even the woman he had left her for. His empire had crumbled, and his young mistress had walked away the moment she realized he wasn't as rich as he used to be. Eleanor smiled to herself as she set down a small box on the kitchen counter. She had spent months planning this next step, preparing for a future that had nothing to do with Richard. Instead of wallowing in bitterness, she invested her settlement wisely, starting her own company, one dedicated to helping women over 50 reinvent their lives after divorce. What Richard had seen as her weakness, she had turned into her strength. A week later, a news article popped up in her inbox. Carter Enterprises, the company Richard had once ruled over so confidently, was now struggling. Investors were pulling out. His business was floundering without the steady hand that had been there all along, hers. She took a sip of her coffee and scrolled past the article. Uninterested. Richard's downfall was no longer her concern. That same afternoon, as she stood in her beautifully redesigned office, the phone rang. It was Naomi, her lawyer. "You're not going to believe this," Naomi said, amusement lacing her voice. "Richard just sent a request to renegotiate his alimony payments. He claims he's struggling financially." Eleanor laughed, a deep, genuine laugh. "Is that so?" she mused. Naomi chuckled. "Want me to entertain it?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. No, let him figure it out. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. Richard had tried to cast her aside, thinking she would crumble without him. Instead, she had built a life better, stronger, and entirely her own. And that was the best revenge of all. This story is about strength, reinvention, and getting the last word without saying a thing. Eleanor spent 30 years building a life with Richard, only for him to throw it all away for a younger woman. But instead of falling apart, she rose higher than ever, proving that the best revenge isn't anger, it's success. She didn't just take what she deserved, she built something greater, leaving Richard to regret every choice he made. What do you think? Did Eleanor's victory feel satisfying? Comment 2 if you loved her comeback, or 7 if you think she should have handled it differently, and if you believe that life after betrayal can be even better. Hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Let's talk in the comments.